Hey all, FilthyRobot here, doing another Darkest Dungeon 2 deep dive from the early access, this time talking about the Runaway, the new character class that was not part of Darkest Dungeon 1, totally unique to Darkest Dungeon 2. We're going to do our normal here. We're going to talk about the stats and skills of the character, and talk about what they specialize in, and give a little summary of the character at the end here. Let's get right into it. At 36 HP, it's pretty much on the low end of character HP in this game, so fairly squishy here. And at 6 speed, they're fairly fast. Again, I don't really like the combination of fast and squishy. It tends to result in a lot of dot deaths. Let's see what their resists do to help counteract that. At 20 bleed, 20 blight, 50 burn. They're very fire resistant, but they're quite a bit below average on blight and bleed resist. 20 stuns standard, 30 moves about standard, 20 debuff is standard, and 30 disease is standard. So they get increased fire resist at the cost of blight and bleed, which is a pretty expensive trade-off by and large. I regularly call this character by like 3 different names that are not the correct name. This is the Runaway, but I often refer to it as Pyro, Firestarter, or Survivor. So if I do that during this video, be warned. All right, let's get through the skills of the Runaway. This is the bread and butter auto attack. It is Searing Strike, position 1-2, targeting position 1-2, does a light fire burn at 2 points. The damage is on the high end for dot application, 3 to 6, but kind of a low to medium, I guess, damaging ability. The upgrade is 5 more crit, which is pretty meaningless, and a little bit more damage. The dot goes from 2 to 3 and now is a combo payoff where it applies a dot to a random adjacent enemy as well. The big problem with that is it also applies to corpses. So if you kill a creature with a corpse next to it, and if you attack a creature that has a corpse on one side of it and another creature on the other side, it's only a 50% chance to get any value out of that combo at all. This ability is fairly weak by and large, except for the fact that it does play nicely with the companion attacks because it is a dot ability. If you get a free combo attack from a triggered relationship ability, you will also get a free chance to apply a dot, and dots are fairly high damage if you get the time to get their full effect ticking. I'm not very impressed with this ability by and large. It is their bread and butter attack, but it's quite limited in its application. It's just quite a bit worse than Noxious Blast, which is the immediate comparison that comes to mind for it. And I also don't love this character in this position, although we'll talk about positioning on this character in just a minute. All right, next up is Firefly. This is a much better ability by and large. Its damage is quite comparable, 3 to 6, 4 to 7 compared to 2 to 4, 3 to 4. So it's not as much upfront damage, but the dot is quite a bit better, starting at 1 point higher at 3 as opposed to 2, and upgrading to 5 as opposed to I think it was 3, right? So the dot upgrade is really good at the upgraded version of the skill. Has really nice flexibility. It can be used from position 3 or 4 and hits positions 2, 3, or 4 on the opponent's ranks, which is really nice target selection. This is a much better version of the dot. If you had to choose just between Firefly or Searing Strike, you'd choose Firefly pretty much every single time. But of course, that's not the decision you're making. The decision you're making with the Runaway is often, do you want them frontlining or do you want them backlining? And they're a bit of, and we'll get to that as we get going, but talk more about that in a minute. Smokescreen is a fairly interesting ability. This is one of my favorite frontline abilities on the Runaway. It starts off kind of medium. It's a single target. It takes your entire action to apply 2 stacks of blind. Blind is a 50% chance for the opposing, the targeted creature to miss. It does run into debuff resist protection, so if things are highly resistant, you can't apply this debuff. And the action economy isn't great. 50% chance misses for your entire turn is quite a lot of cost, but the upgraded version is quite good. This ability goes from basically unplayable to totally reasonable once you've upgraded it cost-wise. So the upgraded version applies a combo enabler, which is quite solid, keeps the 2 stacks of blind, and also applies Vone, which is 50% damage taken to that creature. So quite a nice ability on the upgrade, but limited from casting from position 1-2. So you have to be a front ranker to use this ability at all on the Runaway. Moving on, Run and Hide. This is probably one of the worst abilities in the game. It's definitely the worst ability on the Runaway. I say that. There's some pretty bad abilities on the Runaway. We'll talk more about that in a second, I guess. But this is a pretty garbage ability. It starts off entirely useless. In any position, you move back 1 and apply stealth. There's not a whole lot of reasons to apply stealth to the Runaway. It's not like they get a bunch of payoffs for being stealth. Essentially, the benefit of applying stealth to the Runaway is they are not targetable by single target attacks, which isn't even that great of protection. There's plenty of AoE attacks and multi-target attacks that will still hit them. And it can't be used. And then the upgraded version applies a heal over time that ticks for 3 per tick. Heal over times, by and large, are worse than heals. Because you can't use them as like single action recoveries. So if you apply this at the end of a fight, because there's only one more action, the enemy is about to die to a dot or something, you get no value out of it because it hasn't had a chance to tick. So a heal over time gets max value the earlier you apply it in a fight, but the earlier you apply it in a fight, the less you can use it for recovery because you're doing other things like applying your dots that are super valuable to get out in the early parts of that fight. This ability is bad. It doesn't really work in either of its iterations. There's not very good protection. It's super bad action economy. It can't really be used as recovery. All you're really using it for is some rider effects and a movement effect. And I don't think it's worth it pretty much ever to have this ability on. Really dislike this ability. Hearthlight, it's another one that's kind of interesting, but kind of not great. It starts off basically unplayable, where it ignores stealth and removes stealth. There aren't a lot of currently dangerous stealthing enemies. There's only, I think, 2 to 3 stealth enemies in the game right now. Some of them hit fairly hard, and removing stealth is good there, and you can equip the skill for that, and it doesn't require upgrades, so it's somewhat useful there, but it's still very clunky to use. It's very weak action economy to do that. The upgrade's a little bit better in that you ignore blind on yourself and remove blind from all your allies while also popping stealth on the enemy. Again, you're going to need to have a fair amount of blinds regularly occurring on your team via diseases or something else to bother upgrading this. It's another one of these abilities that I only ever have equipped because I don't have enough good abilities in any position on the Runaway. So moving forward, Ransack, I don't think I've used this ability to its full potential yet. It reads as a kind of weak nuke. It moves you forward, pulls a target towards you. Pull effects are okay, but not great. Again, the problem being that we don't know how a lot of the enemies behave. We don't really know which enemies are maximally affected by being moved out of position, and they seem to have a lot of ways to recover their position inherently. The damage on this is like low to medium. It doesn't scale up particularly well. It goes 3 to 6 to 4 to 8. The crit chance goes from 5 to 10, but it's still very medium. And then the secondary effect on the upgrade eats your combo points and applies that weak dot effect, right? Where you apply a 3-point burn, but it's to a random adjacent enemy, which means any corpses can eat that dot and give you 0 value out of it. I do use this ability from time to time, but I have to think that the best use of this is in some sort of team that deliberately switches positions a lot, and this enables the position. Because if you're not getting value out of that position move, then this character, then this ability isn't strong enough to play. It's like Rampart on the Man-at-Arms, for example, where the value of it is the movement. So maybe we can make this be useful, and this is one of the ones that seems to have more potential than I've gotten out of it yet, but maybe could be useful in the future. All right, moving on, Cauterize. This is probably the best ability of the Runaway. Most heals in this game at the moment require a certain amount of life points, so rarely can you heal someone who is over 50% HP. This ignores that. This ability is very good. The biggest downside of this ability is you cannot use it from position 4, which matters because this character has a big issue with where they want to stand, and one of the positions they might be playable in would be position 4, except if you can't use Cauterize, you've pretty much given up the best ability on this character, so it's not really worth it to do that. The way this works is the target has to be bleeding. You can heal any target that's bleeding, any friendly target that's bleeding, and it removes the bleed, and it's a pretty decent sized heal. You're limited in uses, but by and large, this is a pretty powerful ability. It does not need to be upgraded to be good. You might upgrade it later just for a little bit bigger healing, but by and large, what you care about is removing a dot and healing a target that you wouldn't otherwise be able to heal. It's good for spot healing. It's good for maintenance healing. It's good for pretty much everything for that. It's a really nice ability. One of the few abilities I like on this character. I just wish I could use it in position 4. Controlled Burn. This ability is cool. It's a unique effect that we haven't seen yet in Darkest Dungeon. So enemies have been able to do this to us prior in some situations where essentially a location on our team, a rank, either rank 1, 2, 3, or 4, is now vulnerable in some way, like they're going to drop a rock on it or it burns us or whatever else. This applies that on the opposite side of the board. So it applies an effect that applies a dot, a burn dot at a location. So if you target rank 4, that rank 4 now is at the start of every round or the start of the creature's turn on that square going to apply I think it's a 2-point burn. The problem I've had with this is that it doesn't do much damage and it takes too long to ramp up. So the dot isn't very big. The targets can still resist the dot, and it's unclear if they're resisting the application chance of the runaway or if the thing that's created there has its own application chance. In other words, you might not even be able to itemize to help this, because perhaps if you have fire application chance on the runaway, the thing that's created on rank 4 where you place that thing doesn't have that application chance. And it's too slow. It takes me a full action to cast this. I get no upfront damage, and it's still that creature has to act before it even gets the burn, and the burn isn't very big, and it needs to stack up multiple times before we're seeing anything of it. So I compare, and the direct comparison, right, is, I mean, I guess if this is position 1-2, the direct comparison is this, Searing Strike, where I get essentially, if that's a 2-point dot, like the unupgraded version of both of these, well, I get from 3 to 6, which is 9, average 4.5 damage. I already get 2 turns of the dot up front and the dot immediately, as opposed to, and my application chance, as opposed to this one, which just gives me a 2-point dot. So if I compare that, I'm like, why the hell would I ever want to do that? Yes, you can cast it on any given fight, any given square, and maybe, I mean, it's going to be at its best versus long fights where there's a lot of chances to continually apply that. But I haven't found this to be strong at all yet. And I haven't found the upgraded version to be any stronger. I think it's a 3-point dot instead of a 2-point dot. It doesn't even tell you in the tooltip here, which is kind of annoying too. But I had it resisted multiple times. I just found it super underwhelming. I'm hoping to find a use for it or see it get buffed to the point where it's useful, but it hasn't been there yet. All right, next up is Dragonfly. I like this ability. This is another, by the way, 1-2. So you might have noticed the only abilities I like on the Runaway thus far are Smokescreen and Dragonfly and Firefly. And Firefly is a 3-4 ability, and Smokescreen and Dragonfly are 1-2 abilities. So this moves you back 1, which is a bit awkward, but it applies burn to the front 2 targets. It has a small amount of damage, and I like small amounts of damage on my dots because it breaks things like block in particular. So remove a block charge at very low cost in terms of my damage while still applying the dot. And the upgraded version of this does 4 damage as opposed to 3 damage on the dot. So you can early on get a pretty decent fire dot application to a big chunk of the existing enemies at a pretty decent cost in actions. Now, it's not big damage, and I don't really like the Runaway in the front 2 positions, but this is one of the better abilities if you're going to be using that. All right, moving on, Firestarter. This one's interesting. It's hard to use this well. Again, this is something that combos with like the Hellions breakthrough ability, or I think the Occultist has an ability that applies a bleed to all locations, right? That also has damage. This would be something to apply to this. You want to cast this on someone throwing out AoEs regularly. Because what it does is it applies a buff to the target. That target then has, each of their attacks has a application of fire damage, of a fire dot to it. I haven't found this to be good enough to use in most fights, but some boss fights and using it with some AoEers, this becomes a little bit more interesting. Has a limited number of uses, has a long cooldown, so you're not going to be able to do this how you'd like to do this, which is at the beginning of a fight. You'd like to throw it out the first 2 rounds. You can't even do that. It seems weak to me. I understand the concept of it, but it hasn't really worked out for me in practice yet. Backdraft. This ability is kind of weird. Position 1-2 requirements, hits anything except position 1, requires a monster be in position 1, and requires that creature in front have a burn on them, ignores guard, and it takes deals 50% of the remaining fire damage on that monster in front as damage to either 2, 3, or 4. Here it doesn't say it removes the burn either, which is a little bit more interesting, because I initially read this as removing the burn. I can't tell if that's true or not. If it removes the burn, it's useless, because this is just not a type of thing that you really want to be doing. If it keeps the burn there and then does damage in the back, that's a little bit more interesting, because you can then, for example, use something like, not Firestarter, Dragonfly, set up some burn, and then use the remaining dots from that one to nuke a target in the back. I haven't played with this ability a lot because I initially read it like the Plague Doctor one, which is very much win more. But this might actually be more flexible than I initially gave it credit for if it does not remove that burn. The problem is, again, this is another position 1-2 ability on the Runaway. And all the 1-2 abilities on the Runaway, Backdraft, Dragonfly, and Smokescreen, are all kind of medium. Like Smokescreen, the better of those. But none of these abilities give the Runaway survivability. None of them offset the fact that she has 36 HP and needs to be in position 1-2. And then her survivability options are this pile of garbage, where you're moving backwards and applying a small heal over time and hoping that stealth gets you protected. Like none of that does anything for me. So mostly what I end up using Runaway for is a sad position 3 nuker where I can activate Cauterize and Firefly, which is sad in the sense that it does good damage, but it's really, really one-dimensional. We're occasionally doing things like throwing out like a Smokescreen, or later on with the AoEs being unlocked here. Nope, it's not that one. This one here. I don't like this character, is my summary of this. I haven't found a good position for them. I haven't found that their movement effects really play well with their toolkit. It's rare that I want to, for example, start in the, so what is their major movement effect that's of any relevancy is not Hearthlight, this one, Ransack, which is moving forward. So how is this character supposed to play? I'm supposed to start with something like Firefly in the back while having this equipped, then move forward with Ransack, but Firefly can't target position 1, so I can't then conclude with Backdraft. Like, it's just clunky. What I end up doing with this character is just leaving it in position 3, Fireflying a lot, and then Cauterizing every single time that's up for the heal. And then she's very vulnerable. If with that build, she's super vulnerable to being moved to position 4. And you can't even Ransack in position 4. So if you're playing in position 3 and you get knocked back to position 4, you can't even then fix that by moving forward, because Ransack can only be used from positions 1, 2, and 3. So I don't like this character. I give this character a C rank, and I can't decide yet if that's me not using it well or if it just doesn't really play very well. Now, these dot applications, Firefly and Backdraft, are both quite good, or not Backdraft, this one, Dragonfly, are both quite good. That's a lot of dot damage being added up. So that makes her fairly good versus bosses, especially bosses that don't have a lot of fire resist. But inherently, she's so one-dimensional, and her only really useful skills are fire dots, that like the whole area, I think it's is it the Sprawl? Can't remember what it's exactly called, the Burning City area. That whole area, she starts weak in. You have to itemize the crap out of her to make her even playable there, and she doesn't play well with other comps. She doesn't seem very good with movement effects. She's very squishy, so she doesn't want to play up front. She just seems very weak in a lot of different positions for me. I'm confused by this character, and I feel like the character design is confused in of itself, that I don't think it really fits together well. And this is probably because it's a new character, right? They haven't had time to iron out all the things. Maybe they didn't want it to come in as overpowered. They start like by putting it in this kind of weaker spot. We'll see how it ends up, but my initial take on this character is not very good. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you guys have really cool things you've found that this character can do, I want to hear about it, because I want to see it and test it and play it myself. So let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.